UW, and we can dive in. So here at the University of Wisconsin, we have Learning Analytics Center of Excellence, which is a part of our central IT unit that Darian and I report into. We have titles that are Learning Analytics Architect. I like to describe that as sort of the tech support, techie architect nerd brain of our learning analytics unit. We have colleagues who have expertise, and actually Darian is one of them, in analysis and educational psychology and all of the fun bits of student success. I help empower that with the tech side. We're going to talk to y'all today a little bit about the tech and a little bit about the student success support, about our LIVA project. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Darian to take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. So today we are going to talk about LAVA, which is our Learning Analytics View for Advisor. So we're going to do a very kind of high level overview of our introduction to LAVA and learning analytics at UW at the Center for Learning Excellence. Center for Learning Analytics of, oh my goodness. What
Learning Analytics Center of Excellence.
Thank you. Goodness.
That's why we're a team.
I don't also work with her or anything. And then our LAVA 2.0, because we have really iterated LAVA over multiple semesters. So the spring 2023 testing we'll do a high level of, and then fall 2023 pilot, and then kind of where we want to go in the future. And then of course we'll hopefully now have a lot of time for some Q&A. Also, there'll be natural breaks throughout, and I'll make sure to pause, and Chris and I will pause to make sure that we are getting any questions as they're coming in. Feel free to throw them in the chat. So first things first, our introduction to LAVA. So, and I'm sorry, I want to point out really quickly too that some of our slides are very wordy. But we also want to share our slides out with everyone so that anyone that thinks this project is really, really cool or wants to do it, you have all of the information that you need to hopefully be able to get started. So some of our slides are wordy. Please don't read them word for word, because I'm definitely not going to, so you shouldn't either. But first things first, our Learning Analytics View for Advisors. As we were going through this and talking with advisors, we had a lot of feedback from advisors that of course, advisors already have the tools and resources to intervene with students. But what they didn't have was the data, especially when it came to the pandemic. The pandemic really accelerated this need that advisors had to be able to identify potentially struggling students, and they were just really missing out on that piece. A lot of our previous efforts around learning analytics at UW-Madison centered completely on instructors, and we were still kind of heading down that direction, but then advisors were kind of our squeaky wheel when the pandemic started of, we need help, we need to reach our students. So that really got this conversation started to really get our advisors in that front line, and to be able to act a little bit more proactively with our students. So our pilot we did with complete all online students, of course. I mean, besides the fact that it was just during the pandemic as well. Though a broad population was involved in the design and the feedback of this first iteration, and really every iteration ever since then. So LAVA 1.0, we started out just as many others start out with a dashboard. This is not going to be a session on how we built a dashboard. I promise you that. Please hang in there. We are going to talk about a dashboard for about 5 seconds, and then we're going to move on to where we're at now, which I think, and Chris thinks, since a lot of us at UW-Madison think is pretty cool. So we started with our dashboard. We had a table and 3 visuals. It had information mostly from our LMS system, Canvas. And it was everything that the advisors thought they wanted, everything that they had requested, we threw in here. Well, like anyone that works in any client facing or customer facing knows that the customer doesn't always know what they want. So when we gave them this dashboard with our visuals, it was too much. So where some of this data sources came from. Canvas course logins, and a lot of these are from the things that the advisor said they wanted to, but also when we were doing, some reflection on some of the advisor facing things that are out there already, some of these things were in there. So we included them too. Canvas course logins, date and time of when access and engagement with the course content is happening, a summary performance compared to the peers within their course, and then weekly performance based compared to the entire class's average. So, of course, we gave them all of these things that they wanted, this beautiful thing, feedback. It's cool, but it's too much. We need it to be simplified. There's too much going on. I have this data, but what am I supposed to do with it? Where is the value? What do I do? And then all of our visuals were based on a single course, what a student did in this course. That's cool and everything, because a student could be doing very well in a course, very badly in a course, but it doesn't exactly show them what their semester is going to look like or how we intervene. So we kept coming back to this trends across multiple courses. How can we incorporate some of these ideas? Which leads us to Lava 2.0. Oh, I'm sorry. One other thing that I really want to mention about Lava 1.0 is it was a separate tool that the advisors had to go find. It wasn't part of their normal workflow. So that was a really big piece of advice that we got, that, well, it's just this other thing that I have to go use to look up a student in this other system. So it didn't work. So Lava 2.0 was built inside of our advising gateway, which I'm going to talk about here in just a second. We, instead of just throwing a whole bunch of data at the wall, we built 2 indicator types. And then also focused on student level trends, just as they asked, as opposed to looking at just a singles course. And then we'll also talk about our data sources for Lava 2.0 and how it was significantly better the second time around. And it's going to continue to improve, we hope. So back to some of those focus group feedbacks. It was giving individual course details. So we were trying to look across trends. So we really focused on that. And then the other piece of, well, it's this separate system that I have to focus on. So we really pulled in that too. And then we developed the 2 indicators. So advising gateway is where we kind of landed of where to put this thing, because advisors were already using it. UW-Madison built a custom application called Advising Gateway. It's what our advisors use. It is a custom developed application that is built within our UW-Madison portal that everyone is already using. It brings data for advisors from over a dozen different systems into this advising gateway. So we built it where they are already working. So it's already naturally within their workflow. I know that some of these images might not be the best. I'm sorry, they are a little bit of a lower resolution because they're coming from our mock-up software. So if my screen's kind of not doing it for you, you can look in the artboard too, or the storyboard, and you should also be able to see all of our images from today as well. So we wanted to use Advising Gateway to include our indicators. So if you see here, you see the red arrow, you'll see Lava indicators. We built it right into Advising Gateway. So the 2 types of indicators that we developed, the performance, which is their grades, how well they're doing in a course based on their current calculated grade within Canvas. Now, a student will get an indicator at the course level if they are a full letter grade behind the bottom quartile of their peers. And then performance is measured as any and all grades entered into Canvas. So of course, which I'm going to talk about here in just a second, of course, if an instructor is not using Canvas gradebook, then this doesn't exactly work, but we'll talk about that in just a second. So then participation, or what they're actively doing in their Canvas course, is when a student is 5 days or essentially a week behind the median of the rest of the class. Okay. So we have those course level indicators, like I mentioned, if they are a full letter grade behind most of their peers, that's at the course level. Now, for this to reach the student level, because again, remember our feedback was, I need trends across courses, not just one specific course. So to actually get an indicator within Advising Gateway at the student level, you have to have 2 or more courses that are being raised with a performance indicator or participation indicator or both. So this is what the indicator looks like. If you think back to the screen that I just showed, it had that red arrow and the lava indicators. Well, once you click on the lava indicator, it'll show you that this is an example of a participation indicator, and then you can see which course the indicator has been raised in. So MHR 300 and ILS 139. Don't even ask me what those acronyms stand for because I don't know. We have too many acronyms, as I'm sure everyone probably has the same deal. So performance data uses the Canvas gradebook. So of course there is some caveats and things like that. It uses current calculated grade through the course grade table within Unison, within the UDP. Which is basically just their current LMS grade, and any grades that can be included from external tools. Now, the thing about this, which we're hoping Canvas Data 2 will help us, is there is a data latency on our grade data. It's about a 24 to 48 hour grade latency that is not being seen in our participation. Participation is being pulled directly from the last activity Unison Data Mart. We did not have to develop this, so it was really, really wonderful to be able to switch to this Data Mart. And Chris is going to talk about kind of how we got here, but it was really great because we didn't have to actually build that. And then it made our activity data a lot more fast. A lot more faster? A lot more fast. I don't know. One of those two.
It's fast.
Faster than our performance data anyway. So then I'm going to pass it on over to Chris here.
And actually, Darian, before we shift, I want to both check chat. I'm not seeing any current questions, but if you can go back to the screenshot of Advising Gateway, one of the neat things about the fact that this is an in-house application that we were able to really deeply integrate with. And if you can go back up one more so that we can see Bucky. One of the things that's really critical about this with our indicators is this sets our indicators in context of how Bucky is doing overall. So if Bucky were a 4.0 student and about to graduate, and Bucky was getting some participation indicators in his classes, I would say Bucky's crushing it. He has senioritis. He's got this on cruise control. Maybe not that big a deal as his advisor. However, if we look at our friend Bucky here, who was willing to share his data, Bucky's struggling a little bit more. He's mid-career. He's not got a declared major. He's got sort of a midway GPA, and I'm not an advisor, so I'm vamping this a little bit, but the advisor has all the information about Bucky at their fingertips alongside these indicators. So knowing that Bucky is or isn't participating in his classes could mean totally different things, and having it in situ with the rest of Bucky's information helps the advisors do what they do best and use their spidey senses along with this data. So Bob asks in chat if instructors see this information for all students in their courses, the last activity date. Not as such. It is calculated from Canvas data, and it's possible that Canvas has some sort of equivalent on the course level. But we did with the indicators is not just, Bucky hasn't participated in 3 days. Bucky hasn't participated in 3 days, and that's very, very different than his peers because we're a big residential campus, and the amount that any given discipline or instructor uses Canvas and the connected tools varies tremendously. So the fact that Bucky hasn't logged into his physics class and used any of those resources in 3 days may mean his instructor just doesn't use Canvas and those tools very heavily. And if Bucky looks just like his peers in that class, it's probably not concerning. So we're not actually exposing, even in Lava, the actual activity date. We're just sort of rolling up and saying, Bucky looks different than his peers in terms of activity. And if the advisor wants to drill down and say, Bucky looks different in his general eds, but is crushing it in his declared major courses, that may be a different conversation. So we're trying not to ascribe too much value to one data point. We're trying to look for trends. Is Bucky as a human, or in this case, a badger, struggling? That's a great question, though. All right, so with that, I'm not seeing any additional questions pop up just yet. We'll dive into what we did for spring testing and how our Unison partnership helped us make this happen. So if you can hit the next slide, please. So this is where those of you who aren't software nerds squint at the screen and say, what in the world is she showing me? You don't need to understand or absorb any of this, other than those of you who are at all familiar with the Unison data platform. The top half of this architecture diagram is a representation of what our Unison partnership provides for us. We're getting Kaltura data, we're getting Engage data, we're getting data from Canvas, and that's being put into the Unison data platform for us, both event data, so this activity data that we've been talking about, as well as contextual data. So things about the student, about what courses they're in, about their enrollments. One of the really cool things about the fact that Unison has provided this to us through Google Cloud Platform and through a standardized set of tools is we were able to lay some of our needs kind of alongside that without needing to get developers with a capital D involved. I was it. I wrote this beast of a query that you see on the right side. I only include it because you can see it has a stupid number of joins and a bunch of logic in it. But the great thing was we could do it all in SQL. So we were able to tinker with this logic of what's the right amount of indicator and just hit the UDP live. And actually in our first version, that little green bit you probably can't read says whisk views. Right in Unison data platform, we were able to create some views of activity quartiles and grade quartiles. So that was the heavy lifting of that calculation was done by Google Cloud Platform and by the cloud computing resources instead of anything we were doing on our side. That allowed us to then kind of test out our logic. And one of the biggest things we kept hearing from advisors was, gosh, y'all, if you set up a system where all of a sudden I have flags on 100 different students, I don't have time to follow up on that. You got to get the signal to noise on this right. This can't just tell me that everybody is struggling or it has no value to me. So we were able to, before we even put software in the field, pull data and play with how many indicators are we getting? What percentage of the students are we going to see in this space? And all of this was able to be done with a live query without writing a lick of software, which allowed us to really sort of test out our hypothesis before we engaged with our partners in software development. Darian, I'm going to ask you to flip to the next slide. So in fall 2022, prior to us building the front end, we started development of these indicators. The great thing about this was Darian is an R guru. She's super comfortable slinging R code and pulling data in. And yes, Mark, I'd be happy to share the query. It's evolved a little bit, but yep, it's out there in Git, and I'd be happy to share it. so she was able to do this sort of testing in R as a data scientist in the tools that she's most used to, and for us to adjust before we went live. So if you remember back, we were talking about last activity day, and originally we kind of went, all right, we think if I'm a week behind my peers in my course, it probably means something is up. It's not just that I have 1 or 2 busy days at the start of the week. It's probably a trend. We found that if I was 7 days behind my peers was our standard, we were getting almost no participation indicators. So we actually reduced that to a week, to the 5 days, to a working week, and got a much better signal to noise long before we put anything in the field. All right, I think we can do the next slide. So that brings us to actually putting software in the field. So in fall 23, we piloted this with advisors. We identified 24, we'll call them friendlies, who we collaborate with commonly, who participated in the pilot. In addition to that, we pulled and analyzed data for about 3,800 students. For context, UW-Madison has somewhere around 40,000 undergrads, depending on how you define that. So it's a decent percentage of the population, but certainly not everybody. And we pulled that data across 3 different populations that we were particularly interested in. Those who had the advisors who were participating in the pilot, which is a specific unit on campus, as well as some other groups on campus that had interest in this tool as sort of being our next folks. So one of the biggest things that we did as we moved from spring to fall was some significant performance improvement. And this is 100% courtesy of our colleagues on the UDP platform team. You saw my beast of a query. It works. It's validated. Wasn't fast. So we, in the first version, for a variety of reasons, weren't pulling this data for a bunch of students. We were sort of doing it one by one, only if we pull it up in the individual student. Here's the fix to that. We started going down a rabbit hole with my developer colleagues of like, okay, we're going to cache data and we're going to build this other layer. And like, we were engineering the bejesus out of this. And our friends at Unizen said, hang on, we build data marts all the time for a living as professionals. How about we build you a test data mart and we see if this works on that side? So for our testing, they built us this custom Lava data mart that on an hourly basis takes my beast of a query, parks the data, and allows us to just query what to our software looks like a flat data table. So they use their resources and their expertise to really help move this project forward, without which we wouldn't have been able to make our other big leap in terms of the software design, which we can go to the next slide. So now with list view, originally our advisors said, I don't want these flags all over my stuff. I need to be able to look at my advices. And if I'm sitting down to have an advising session with Darian, I'd like to know about this data, but only once the student is really in front of me and I'm having a conversation. Once they got comfortable with seeing the data on Bucky's profile, then we started to get what was the next natural progression as a request, which is, if I'm looking at my list of advisees, if I'm assigned 150 advisees, how do I know who I might want to be proactive with? And we brought the Lava flag up to sort of this student level. There's 3 different tabs here. Advisors can see all of their assignees. They could search for Bucky's name and see everybody who has Bucky as a first name. They can see all students because advisors help each other out. So if Darian's out of the office, I might be spontaneously meeting with one of her advisees, and I may need to find out quickly what's up with Bucky. So we created this sort of student level indicator on the list view, and now they can do things like filter only for students who have indicators or only for students who don't, or sort by it. But it gives them this data at an aggregate view, none of which would have been possible without the performance improvement on the BigQuery side. It just wouldn't have scaled without massive software development investment on our part. That also enables, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to hit the point again, because one of the really neat things about working with colleagues who know a lot about educational psychology and statistics is they take a really intentional approach to, hey, we built these experimental indicators. We're trying to see if they have value. And one of our big goals in this was to look at these indicators over the semester and across different populations. So we built out a real lightweight analysis infrastructure. And by we, I mean me and Darian, like very lightweight group. It's not like we had a cast of 10 full-time developers helping us with this. UW already has an established Google Cloud contract and has been through cybersecurity review of it. So I'm empowered to lay that green piece of our infrastructure is UW's Google Cloud account. It's sitting right alongside the News and Data platform. And if you are someone who has access to data in both environments, you can dynamically combine that data without us having to ship data here, there, and everywhere. So we could leave all the activity data, all the UDP goodness in place, and we could lay alongside it snapshot data, grade data, demographic data for our students, and Darian or another analyst can use the tools that they're comfortable with, whether that's Looker Studio or Tableau or RStudio, and connect directly to Google Cloud to do the sort of analysis that she's going to talk about a little bit next.
So I am actually going to just speed us up really quick so that we do actually have some time for Q&A, since we started a little slower. The analysis report is quite large. There's a lot going on into it, but the big high level things is it's performing as we expected. The rates are right around where we wanted them to be for both performance and for participation. There was no significant impact on any student group, like demographic type, or from a specific school or college or anything like that. And then even at the course level, these trends are still fairly consistent. Now, there are a couple caveats to this, because, you know, there's caveats to everything, specifically as it relates to performance indicators. Underrepresented groups are getting 2 to 3 times more indicators, performance indicators, which from the outside looking in, that goes, oh my goodness, that's an issue, that our underrepresented students are getting more indicators than our underrepresented students. However, the problem with that is these indicators are built based on the grades that they are receiving in Canvas, which grade discrimination in grading is a well-known fact within education, that underrepresented groups, first-generation students, do receive, statistically, more less well on grading. So while it was, when you see that, it's like, oh my gosh, something's wrong with our model, we need to fix it. But it actually aligns with the reality, unfortunately, of our educational system. Something that was very interesting, though, was some of these other student groups that were receiving more indicators in weird places, which is something that I want to investigate further, such as part-time students. Our part-time students were receiving higher performance and participation, which we do know that they work and live differently than our full-time students, but it was higher than I would have predicted that it should have been. So that leads us to future iterations and some things that we would like to explore and that we're going to do. So Canvas Data 2, integration and validation, we're really hoping that that's going to speed up our grade data specifically, hoping that's true. we want to add some sort of temporal component. By that, I mean duration of indicators. It's great for an advisor to go in there and see that their student has an indicator. What would be really helpful is to know how long has that indicator been there. If an student that's had an indicator for 3 weeks might need to get more priority intervention right now than a student that just got an indicator raised today. We don't exactly know what that's going to look like yet, but it is something that we are exploring. Something else that I think is particularly interesting and really showcases how learning analytics depends on how a course is designed and structured within our LMS system, Canvas. Because what about students that are struggling? They don't pass the course, but they didn't receive a single indicator throughout the entire semester. What does that mean? Or on the flip side, students that might seem like they're struggling the entire semester and then they pull out with a very high grade at the end. What does that say about our the Canvas structure, the design of the course? What does that look like? And then incorporating some new audiences that we think might have their own unique things going on, such as purely online students, for example. Is there something unique to that group that this might not fall underneath of? With that, we're going to go to some Q&A, but really quickly before the Q&A, I know this may have seemed like a Chris and Darian show, but I just want to really point out that we had phenomenal help from our development with a capital D team, our Center for User Experience team, our advising team, all of our people that have helped us with evaluation and everything. So while the data side, which is really what we honed in on today, was me and Chris, it definitely was not a 2-person show. So I just wanted to really say that. And we are open for questions. Feel free to unmute yourself if you can. Actually, I don't even know if you all can, or you can throw them in the chat. Yes, thank you, Chris. Yes, our Unizen folks couldn't have made these improvements without you all. Yes, we do purposely wait. This is also something that we are putting in our documentation of when you're looking at LAVA indicators, when is the time to look at them and when is the time to not look at them. Those first 5-6 weeks or so, we know are very volatile. Don't really use indicators at that time. Don't use it during spring break. Don't use it during the winter holiday. You might see a lot of indicators that are not really true because students aren't logging in for spring break or whatever break it is. So yes, that is really great point.
Yeah, and I'm just going to reiterate, because I'm not a statistician and I wouldn't have thought of this, because these indicators are all peer-based, that also helps with if the instructor isn't using it at all, or to Nicole's question, if the instructor is consistently getting the grades in 2 weeks after the activity, as long as they're doing it the same for their whole population, that helps control for it. Now, of course, we can have the scenario where I'm the professor, I've got 3 TAs and they're grading at different rates. And then again, the realities of how we teach and the complexities of educating humans makes this tricky. So one of the challenges for us is to try and figure out what we can control for in our modeling and what is just the reality of we need to share with our faculty the costs and benefits of designing courses one way versus another for the effectiveness of being able to use learning analytics. Darian, do you have a gut instinct to Bob's question?
I'm sorry, I'm getting there. What are some of what other measures are you considering? I, of course, as any analyst wants to actually make this predictive in the future. Predictive is a touchy subject, if I may say so. So I used final course grades to look at our course level activity. But I would love to do some predictiveness with final grades. Attendance is a long shot because every instructor gets to, of course, do whatever they want to do. But where I could do a more hands-on approach with a couple of courses where we could also include attendance for, maybe they're using Top Hat for attendance, and that's actually something that's being recorded in their LMS. But we also know attendance has a huge impact on final grades. So those are some additional measures that I would love to incorporate. It just might not be scalable at UW currently, but I would love I would love to do some, kind of one-on-one things. Like, for instance, attendance is not going to scale at the university. It just doesn't.
And even, if we spend tremendous resources, because it is one of the things that instructors and advisors ask about is, do we have attendance data and can we use it? Well, the instructors who've taken the time to make people swipe WIS cards or something to take attendance in their course, WIS cards being our student ID cards. Again, we're talking about human beings. If I'm a student and I know that I'm not going to class, Darian is, and I know my instructor is keeping track of attendance, I'm going to hand her my WIS card and ask her to swipe me in, whether I win or not. So more data, and is not always better if it's not actually representative of human behavior. And that's a hard thing for me as a data person to say, because instinctively more data is always better, and any data is better than no data. But we also counsel our partners all the time of messy data. First, we got to do no harm. If you have a student who's in a course who the course's grades are going to be curved at the end, and I reach out as the advisor and say, hey, Sarah, you're really struggling in Orgo, and I'm worried because you're a student athlete and this might affect your eligibility. And Orgo is going to apply a curve at the end, and the fact that she was getting a 40 is no big deal. Now I've created a bunch of anxiety in a student who didn't necessarily need it. So it's getting this right and doing all of the analysis to sort of check our work afterwards and do this ethically is sort of the trickiest bit, and why I'm glad I have real analysts along for the ride with me, because I could build all kinds of stuff. That doesn't mean I should. Signal to noise testing, we were shooting for 20 to 30% of the advisors in if I have 100 advisees, 20 to 30% of them is sort of what we were going for the right signal to noise. We do have feedback from the advisors who participated in the pilot, and we'll find out from them whether they felt like we've got it right or not.
And I think that leads us, and we're about out of time too. So thank you all for coming. But I just, along with the signal to noise, I think the bigger question here is the duration question. It doesn't necessarily help me to know that 20 to 30 of my students, if I had 100 students, were indicated today, because I can't possibly even get to all 20 to 30 of them today. But I could get to the 5 that have been indicated for a month. So I think that's really where our duration component is going to really come in handy in the future. With that, it is 1 o'clock. We are done at 1 o'clock, right? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you for bearing with us.